Hi, everyone, and welcome to one of our interviews here at LeaderWise with one of our spiritual directors. I am delighted to welcome Susan Miller to the conversation. Susan, it's so good to be with you.
Well, thank you, Emily. It's good to have this conversation with you and with LeaderWise.
Yeah, we are really just delighted to have a group of spiritual directors who are on our team and helping leaders grow in their sense of service. So lots of people don't know what spiritual direction is or how you even become a spiritual director. So I just wanted to start by asking you to tell me about your journey in becoming a spiritual director. What did that look like?
My journey started a long time before I embarked on it. So back in 1996, I sent away to Shalem Institute, which is out of Maryland area, for their spiritual direction training program. And I got the folder, and I had kids at home at the time, and I was working full time. And the folder sat on my desk for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, I said, I don't think this is the right time for me.
Uh-huh.
And then in 2014, I knew I needed to change my focus a little bit. I had been working in judicatory work for, at that time, 13 years, and I knew I needed to do something different. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I did know that one piece of it was to go and get spiritual direction training, because it seemed to me that in all of my judicatory work, a lot of what I had done was listen to our clergy mostly, but lay people too, and listen to their questions about God and about
Uh-huh.
spiritual lives.
Yeah. What was it that what was the impetus for sending away for that packet from Shalem back in 96?
Uh, I come from a Lutheran tradition, well, actually Roman Catholic and Lutheran tradition, and they're both fairly intellectual. And I always felt that there was an experiential piece of
Mm.
life that we weren't tapping into enough,
Yeah.
and people are hungry for. And so
Yeah.
that was the initial impetus, and that continues in some ways to be the impetus to kind of meld or to weave together our sort of intellectual understanding, but really that very personal experiential understanding or questions about who God is. I mean, we can talk about we can talk about God, but can we talk to God? In fact,
Uh-huh.
one of my first clients came to when I was asking for guinea pigs for spiritual direction.
Yeah.
This was a minister who was a retired minister. He had ministered for 55 years, or no, probably not that long, but he was like in his 70s. And he said, I've spent 30 or 40 years of my life talking about God, and now it's time for me to learn how to talk to God.
Wow.
And I think he personified for me
Yeah.
some of our quest is.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's helping people take the stuff of their everyday lives and say, or ask the questions about where's God in the midst of this,
Right. Right.
right? In fact, years ago, I was a hospital chaplain. I mean, I was doing hospital chaplaincy work, and I was doing in the ward I worked on, or in the unit I worked on, we had patient meetings.
Hmm.
And we'd go to these patient meetings and talk about different people. And I can remember after one of them, one of the social workers said to me, she said, she said, you can't, you're astute about people, but I didn't hear a lot about the religious quest. And I thought that took me aback. I had to think about it myself, but
Hmm.
I thought it was really interesting, because for me, the stuff of everyday life is the religious quest.
Right.
And so to talk about this woman's feelings of loneliness or of fear was a spiritual conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I'm mindful that, you saw your work as in adjudicatory work as a lot of spiritual direction,
Mhm.
but then also, so you're working with leaders in that capacity. But then 2019 happens, and you're moving into spiritual direction and having clients, and we're moving into a pandemic, where the world is being, and especially religious life, is being tossed up and reformed. I'm wondering what some of the issues you saw leaders working on in spiritual direction, what those issues were in your adjudicatory work, and then how you've seen that shift.
The pandemic made everything more intense, I think. But the issues in some ways were the same issues. I mean, in my adjudicatory work, I worked with people who were in the midst of vocational crisis, congregations in the midst of crisis, and so the clergy in the midst of that, or the lay leaders in the midst of that, are kind of, they're trying to deal with the crisis, but then they're also asking the question of, where's the divine in the midst of this?
Yes.
Or I'm trying, I think I'm doing what is good work, but it's not being, people aren't receiving it that way.
Yeah.
What's going on there? So COVID magnified that, because I think for our clergy, they were being caught in between.
Yeah.
All the time they were caught in between. And so they were trying to deal with these two groups in every congregation, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then they had their own feelings, and where am I going with these? So there was that feeling of loneliness. I think not loneliness. I mean, some of it is regular loneliness, but some of it is, this is a hard job and I have nobody to talk to about it.
Right.
That I think was just so magnified during the pandemic. Even now I don't hear about that as much as I did then.
Yeah.
And then the whole question of, is this what I signed up for? And if I didn't sign up for it, do I still want to do it?
Right. Right.
So there's that, I think there's that discernment piece to spiritual. There's the transition piece, and is their own questions about God that they can't, or the divine that they can't, they need to find a safe space to answer, to ask the questions. And when you're working as clergy, and most of my clients are clergy, when you're working as clergy, where do you go to ask them?
Right. Right. When you're supposed to have it all figured out.
Right.
Yeah.
And as we grow older, we know we know less than more. So that's hard,
Yes. We're more asking the questions than answering them. I'm wondering what you've seen in terms of the impact of spiritual direction having in their lives, especially when they meet these crises points, but at any time.
I think the impact for people who stick with spiritual direction is really an expansive view of the divine and of people. I think that comes, but it comes over a long period of time.
So my instructor always taught us, you have a third chair in the room, and the third chair is the divine, right? And it's so funny, on Zoom, I had a fellow student who had a tiny chair that was, that was just up on a little shelf behind her. And one of the transitions I see, or one of the shifts I see, is like that expansiveness that God or the divine isn't judging you as well.
Right.
But with you.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the whole, in some ways, that's the whole purpose of spiritual direction, is to know more and more the love that the divine has for you. One of my favorite verses is Isaiah 43, but it's not 1-3, it's 4. But basically it says, you are precious in my sight and honored, and I love you.
Yeah.
And to me, people need to hear that.
Yeah.
We just all need to hear that, right?
Yeah.
And spiritual direction is a way of, in some ways, asking the question, well, how in the midst of this mess am I hearing those words? Or I need to hear those words, and this space in which I can hear them.
Yeah, because there's a dominant message. We definitely hear it at LeaderWise of scarcity, right? You're not enough. the church is dying, there's not enough in the church, or any organization, there's not enough money, there's not enough volunteers. So you can feel like I'm going down on a sinking ship, and there's just not enough. There's not enough. There's not enough. And
the other piece, so another favorite scripture of mine.
Yeah.
Jeremiah 31:3.
Mm-hmm.
And in Jeremiah 31:3, the divine says, I have loved you with an everlasting love.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I heard that scripture, I thought, okay, then that's the first half. And the second half is, therefore you should do something.
Uh-huh.
Jeremiah 31:3 says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore I keep my faithfulness to you.
Mm.
It says nothing about us. It says nothing about the divine. And for me, I think we also need that lesson, because we mess up all the time. We do things wrong. We know all of those things, but behind it all is this presence that says to, I'm faithful to you. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I hear in terms of when you say, when people stick with it, I think it's a faithful practice to enter in spiritual direction, because you're coming back to God and remembering that lesson over a long period of time, as opposed to like a short period where you're like, I'm in discernment, I need God's advice on this one thing, right? Whereas it's a regular practice to meet God halfway, meet God in a room and say, do you still have faith in me? And can I have faith in myself?
Right.
What song is your life's current theme song?
I want to say two things. One is that my songs are never popular. They're always really and truly, they're hymns.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, they've always been hymns to me. And the hymn that continues through my life is one that I never thought I'd admit to. and it's How Great Thou Art.
Yeah.
And then I remember when I was working in southeastern Minnesota, every day I was in the car, I would get into the car and I would sing that hymn.
Yeah.
And then, my favorite place is the ocean. When I go to the ocean, I sit and I think of that hymn. So it's just, I could say a lot of other ones, but really it's How Great Thou Art. I don't know if I want to admit that. It is. I love some of the new ones, but the old ones still, they touch my soul in a way that always fills me with joy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I am thankful that you feel safe enough to admit it. Well, listen, Susan, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for taking this time with me.
Oh, glad to. It's an honor.
Blessing.